I want to tell you something that I have never said out loud before. Some of my loneliest moments have not been when I was alone. They have been in the middle of conversations, at dinners with people who care about me, at parties where everyone seemed to be having exactly the kind of time I was supposed to be having, sitting next to someone I love, talking about something completely ordinary and feeling, underneath all of it, this quiet, persistent, inexplicable distance, like there was a glass wall between me and everyone in the room, like I was watching my own life from slightly outside of it. Like no matter how close the people around me were physically, something essential was not reaching them, and something essential from them was not reaching me. I used to think something was wrong with me. I used to think that the people around me, the ones who seemed easy and present and genuinely connected, had figured out something I had not. That they had access to a kind of closeness I was somehow missing. That the loneliness I felt was a personal failure, evidence of some fundamental flaw in the way I was built. It took me a long time to find out that almost everyone feels this. Not sometimes, regularly. That the loneliness in a crowded room is one of the most universal human experiences that almost nobody talks about openly, because talking about it requires admitting that the connections you have are not as deep as they appear. And that admission feels like betrayal of the people around you, of yourself. And then I found the philosophers, not as an academic exercise, not because I was looking for intellectual stimulation, because I was looking for an explanation, because I needed someone to tell me why. And the philosophers, Heidegger, Sartre, Fromm, Kierkegaard, and others, not only had the explanation, they had been sitting with this exact question for their entire lives. And what they found was not depressing. It was the most clarifying, the most relieving, the most genuinely useful thing I had ever read about being a human being in a world full of other human beings. That is what this video is. An honest conversation about the loneliness that does not go away when you are surrounded by people. Where it comes from, what it is actually telling you, and what you can do about it that actually works. Not the surface fixes, not the advice to go out more, or be more social, or download another app, but the real work, the kind that goes all the way down to where the loneliness actually lives. Let's go through it together. Martin Heidegger was a German philosopher who wrote one of the most difficult and most important books of the 20th century, Being and Time. He was not an easy man. He was not a warm man, but he understood something about human existence that goes deeper than almost any other thinker. He said that a fundamental condition of being human is thrownness. You were thrown into existence without choosing it. Without choosing when, where, into which family, which culture, which body, which set of circumstances. You arrived already in the middle of a story you did not write, in a language you did not choose, with people you did not select, surrounded by a world that was already fully formed and running before you got there. And you are the only one who experiences your existence from the inside. This is Heidegger's first and most foundational point about loneliness. Not that people are cruel or unavailable or bad at connecting, but that the very structure of existence makes complete connection impossible. You are a separate center of experience. Everything that happens to you, every feeling, every fear, every moment of joy, every private thought, happens inside a subjective world that no one else can fully enter. You can describe it, you can share it, but the description is never the thing itself. The map is never the territory. Think about the last time you tried to explain a feeling to someone. You found the words. You gave them the context. You watched them nod and say they understood, and somewhere in the back of your mind you thought, not quite. That is close. But that is not it. The full weight of it, the full texture of it, the specific way it lives inside me, that did not transfer. It could not. Language is a translation, and something always gets lost in translation. Heidegger called this the inmost character of existence. Your life is irreducibly yours. Nobody can live it for you. Nobody can die for you. Nobody can feel for you. And nobody can fully understand the precise, specific, unrepeatable experience of being you from the inside. That is not a failure of your relationships. It is the structure of reality. But here is where Heidegger goes further. He says that most people spend their entire lives running from this truth. They fill the silence with noise. They fill the solitude with company. They fill the almost character of their existence with what he called das Man, the they, the crowd, the anonymous social world whose opinions and standards and expectations they adopt so thoroughly that they forget they ever had their own. And then they feel lonely, even in the crowd, because the crowd can never reach what the they is covering. The loneliness in the crowded room is the own most self, the real, irreducible, specifically your self, pressing against the surface of the performance, reminding you that it is there, reminding you that it has not been met, reminding you that no amount of social activity can substitute for genuine contact with your own deepest existence. Heidegger's uncomfortable gift is this: the loneliness you feel in a room full of people is not a sign that something is wrong with your relationships. It is a sign that you are still there, underneath everything, waiting to be acknowledged. Not by them, by you. Søren Kierkegaard was a Danish philosopher who lived in the 1800s and spent his entire life writing about the deepest interior of human experience. He was profoundly lonely himself. He broke off an engagement to a woman he deeply loved, Regine Olsen, because he believed his melancholy was too deep, his inner world too private, too complicated, too painful to share without destroying her. He understood the loneliness of not being known in the most personal possible way. Kierkegaard wrote about what he called the aesthetic, ethical, and religious stages of existence. But underneath all of that philosophical architecture is something simpler and more devastating. He believed that every human being has an inner life so specific, so particular, so unrepeatable, that the possibility of being truly known by another person is one of the deepest longings and one of the deepest terrors of human existence simultaneously. We want to be known. We want someone to see all of it. The contradictions, the shames, the secret wants, the private fears, the version of ourselves we have never shown anyone, and to stay. To stay, and to say, I see you, all of you, and I am not leaving. That want is so powerful and so terrifying that most people never risk it. Instead, they offer a version of themselves, a selected, curated, carefully managed presentation of who they are that reveals enough to create connection, but conceals enough to feel safe. And the connection they get from this, the warmth, the belonging, the sense of being liked and included, is real, but it is not the same as being known. And the loneliness persists, because what the loneliness is actually about, what it has always been about, is not the absence of people. It is the absence of genuine witness, someone who has seen the real thing and chosen it. Kierkegaard would say, you are lonely because you are hiding. And you are hiding because being seen feels more dangerous than being alone. The wall you built to protect yourself from rejection is the same wall that is keeping out the connection you are desperate for. And the loneliness on your side of the wall is the cost of the protection. This is the most vulnerable thing I can say in this video. I have spent years of my life being very good at connection on the surface, good at conversation, good at warmth, good at making people feel comfortable and seen and heard. And underneath all of that was a version of me that almost nobody had ever actually met. Because I kept it back, because I had decided. Somewhere along the way, without ever making a conscious choice, that the risk of showing it was too high, that the full version might be too much, that if people saw all of it, they would leave. Kierkegaard would say, and how has that been working for you? The loneliness in the crowded room is the answer to that question. It is the cost of the concealment, not because the people around you are incapable of receiving you, but because you have never fully given them the chance. Section 3. Sartre. The lonelies are being seen and still not reached. Jean-Paul Sartre is famous for the line, hell is other people. Most people misread this as misanthropy. Sartre hating people. Sartre saying human relationships are fundamentally terrible. That is not what he meant. What he meant was far more specific and far more devastating. Sartre believed that the presence of other people introduces a specific and inescapable problem into our existence. When another person looks at you, really looks at you, with judgment and assessment and the weight of their perception, they freeze you. They turn you from a fluid, free, constantly becoming subject into an object, a fixed thing with defined characteristics and a settled identity. He called this the look. And the look is not always hostile. The look can be loving. The look can be admiring. But the look always does the same thing. It reduces you to what it can see. And what it can see is never the full thing. It is always a version, an impression, a story the other person is constructing based on the parts of you that are visible to them. And so the loneliness Sartre is pointing at is this: no matter how fully another person sees you, they are still seeing you from the outside. They are constructing their version of you. And that version, however loving, however detailed, however carefully observed, is not you. It is their interpretation of you. And you have to live with the gap between who you are from the inside and who you are in their eyes. And that gap, that permanent, irresolvable gap, is one of the sources of the loneliness in the crowded room. The person who loves you has a story about you. The story is made of the moments they have witnessed, the words you have said, the patterns they have observed. That story is real. It is built from real material. But it is still a story. And the full, living, constantly changing, irreducibly complex thing that you actually are is always slightly more than the story allows for. Sartre also said something that cuts even deeper. He said that we're condemned to be free, that there is no pre-written script for who we are, no fixed essence waiting to be discovered. We create ourselves through our choices, constantly, without a net. And that radical freedom, that constant self-creation, is something no one else can fully participate in. You are always slightly ahead of anyone's understanding of you, always already becoming something that the people who know you have not caught up with yet. That too is a source of loneliness. Not because people are not trying to keep up, but because the speed of your own becoming is faster than any external perception can track. Fromm was a German-American philosopher and psychologist who wrote one of the most important books about love and loneliness ever produced, The Art of Loving. And his starting point is the one that I think lands hardest. He says, "The deepest need of human beings is to overcome separateness, not hunger, not safety. Separateness, the awareness that you are a distinct, bounded, individual self, separate from other selves, separate from the world, alone in your own skin, is the most fundamental source of human anxiety. It is what drives almost every human behavior. The search for love, for belonging, for meaning, for God, for community, for distraction, all of it, at its root, is an attempt to bridge the gap between self and world. To feel, even temporarily, that the separateness has been overcome." And here is where Fromm gets brutal. He says most of the ways people try to overcome separateness do not work. They provide temporary relief but leave the underlying aloneness untouched. And they often make it worse. The first failed solution is conformity, joining the crowd so completely, adopting its opinions, its values, its habits, its version of a good life, that the individual self dissolves into the group. You stop being lonely in the traditional sense because you stop being fully individual. But the loneliness does not disappear, it goes underground. And it surfaces as a vague, persistent feeling that you are not quite living your own life, that something essential is missing, that the connection you feel to the group is real, but somehow not nourishing, because you traded the self that could be genuinely connected for the self that could be safely included. And inclusion is not the same as connection. The second failed solution is what Fromm calls symbiotic union, relationships where two people dissolve into each other, where one person dominates and the other submits, where the boundary between self and other becomes so blurred that neither person is fully themselves anymore. These relationships feel intensely close, and in them, the loneliness temporarily disappears. But it always comes back. Because genuine connection requires two real selves, And when one or both selves have been dissolved into the relationship, what remains is not connection, it is merger. And merger is just a more intimate form of being lost. The third failed solution, the most modern one, is stimulation. Constant noise, constant entertainment, constant contact, constant distraction, the phone that is never more than arm's length away, the silence that is never allowed to be fully silent, the discomfort of being alone with yourself that is immediately treated with input from outside. This solution does not even pretend to address the loneliness, it just drowns it out temporarily. And every time the stimulation stops, every time the screen goes dark and the room goes quiet, the loneliness is right there, unchanged, patient, waiting. Fromm's answer is what he calls mature love, not the feeling of love. The feeling comes and goes, the practice of love, the active, daily, disciplined work of genuine interest in another person, of really seeing them. Not the version that is convenient or flattering or comfortable, but the actual person, with their contradictions, their darkness, their needs, their growth. And the willingness to be genuinely seen in return, to bring the real self into contact with another real self, and to hold that contact even when it is uncomfortable. That, Fromm says, is the only thing that actually addresses the separateness, not eliminating it, but meeting across it, genuinely, with full selves on both sides of the gap. Section 5, the Buddha. The loneliness of clinging. The Buddha approached loneliness from a completely different direction, and his answer is the most counterintuitive of all. He would say that the loneliness you feel in a room full of people is not caused by the room or by the people. It is caused by the relationship you have with yourself when there is no one else around to distract you from it. The Buddha taught that most human suffering comes from craving, from the desperate attempt to hold on to what feels good and push away what feels painful. And loneliness is one of the most painful feelings available to a human being. So naturally, automatically, without even thinking about it, you try to push it away. You fill the silence. You seek the company. You reach for the phone. You do anything at all, rather than sit with the loneliness and let it be what it is. But here is what happens when you run from loneliness. It grows. Every time you refuse to face it, every time you treat it as an emergency to be solved rather than an experience to be felt, you teach yourself that it is unbearable. You make it bigger than it actually is. You give it power over every quiet moment, over every unoccupied hour, over every room that is not full enough. The Buddha's radical suggestion is to sit with the loneliness, not to wallow in it, not to tell yourself a story about how alone you are and always will be, but to actually feel it, to locate it in the body, to notice what it actually is when you stop running from it long enough to look. What most people find when they do this honestly is that the loneliness is not what they thought it was. Underneath the panic of it, underneath the urgency and the reaching and the desperate need to fill the space, there is something quieter, something that, if you sit with it long enough, starts to feel less like a wound and more like a signal. Less like evidence of failure and more like an invitation. An invitation to go inward, to the place where the most important relationship you will ever have is waiting. The relationship with yourself, the one that no one can give you and no one can take away. The one that, when it is genuinely established, changes the quality of every other relationship in your life. Because when you are genuinely comfortable with your own company, when the silence does not frighten you, you stop needing other people to fill a void. And when you stop needing them to fill a void, you can actually see them, not as solutions to your loneliness, but as people. Full, separate, specific people. And that is when real connection becomes possible, the Buddha would say. The loneliness in the crowded room is the self calling you home. And home is not a person or a place. It is the quality of presence you bring to your own existence. Section 7. Paul Tillich. The loneliness of being human and the courage it requires. There is one more philosopher who needs to be in this conversation. Paul Tillich, a German-American theologian and philosopher who wrote a book called The Courage to Be. And his contribution to the understanding of loneliness is something I have never heard discussed in any self-improvement context. But it belongs here, more than almost anything else. Tillich made a distinction that most people have never considered, the distinction between loneliness and solitude. He said they are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. And confusing them is one of the most costly mistakes a person can make in their emotional life. Loneliness, Tillich said, is the pain of being alone. It is the experience of absence, of missing connection, of feeling the gap between yourself and others as a wound. Loneliness is something that happens to you, something that arrives uninvited and that you endure. Solitude is something completely different. Solitude is the glory of being alone. It is the active, chosen, intentional turning toward your own existence in a way that nourishes rather than depletes. It is aloneness that is inhabited rather than suffered. And it is not just tolerable, it is necessary. It is the condition in which the deepest parts of yourself can be heard because the noise of the world is temporarily absent. Tillich believed that most people never experience genuine solitude because they are so afraid of loneliness that they cannot be alone long enough to get there. The moment the quiet arrives, the discomfort begins. And the discomfort is immediately treated with noise, with company, with distraction. And so the person never gets past the surface of their aloneness to the place where solitude lives, where the self can actually speak, where the questions that matter can finally be heard because nothing is drowning them out. He wrote that the courage to be includes the courage to face the anxiety of loneliness, to sit with it, to go through it rather than around it, and to discover on the other side the creative, nourishing, deeply human experience of genuine solitude. Think about the people you most admire, the ones who seem most genuinely themselves, most settled in their own skin, most capable of real connection when they are with others. I would guess that almost all of them have a relationship with solitude, not because they are introverted or antisocial or prefer to be alone, but because they have done the work of being with themselves that makes genuine connection with others possible. You cannot give what you do not have. If you have never sat quietly with yourself long enough to know what is actually there, what you actually feel, what you actually want, what you actually believe when no one is watching and no performance is required, then what you bring to your relationships is a curated selection. And people can feel the curation even when they cannot name it. The connection that results is warm but shallow, close but not quite real. Tillich is asking you to build the foundation that every genuine connection in your life rests on. The foundation of knowing yourself, not the performed self, the actual one. And that knowing only happens in the specific conditions that solitude creates. The loneliness you feel in a crowded room is, in Tillich's reading, a symptom of not having enough genuine solitude, of having run from the aloneness so consistently that you never develop the inner resources that make you genuinely present. To yourself first, and therefore to others. The cure for loneliness in the crowd is not more people. It is the courage to be alone with yourself long enough that the solitude becomes something you can carry into the crowded room with you. A quality of presence, of settledness, of genuine contact with your own existence. That stays with you even when the room is full. And that makes real connection possible precisely because you are no longer desperate for it. Every philosopher in this video is pointing at the same truth from a different angle. Heidegger says the loneliness is built into existence, and the answer is to face your own most self instead of hiding in the crowd. Kierkegaard says the loneliness is the cost of concealment, and the answer is the terrifying, necessary risk of being genuinely known. Sartre says the loneliness is the gap between your inner life and how you are perceived, and the answer is to keep becoming, to keep creating yourself without waiting for anyone else's perception to catch up. Fromm says the loneliness is separateness that cannot be eliminated but can be genuinely met through the practice of mature love, of full selves in real contact. The Buddhist says the loneliness is a signal to go inward, to establish the relationship with yourself that makes all other relationships possible. And Tillich says the loneliness is the pain of never having developed genuine solitude, and that solitude is the foundation everything else rests on. None of them are offering you a cure. because the loneliness cannot be cured. It is woven into the fabric of being a separate, conscious, mortal human being. But all of them are offering you something more valuable than a cure. They are offering you a different relationship with it. And here is what a different relationship looks like in practice. The first thing is to stop treating loneliness as an emergency. The loneliness you feel in a crowded room is not a crisis. It is information. It is your deepest self telling you that something is missing. Not in the room, but in the quality of contact you are making, with the people around you, and with yourself. When you feel it, instead of immediately reaching for your phone or redirecting the conversation or doing anything to make it stop, pause. Just for a moment, let it be there. Ask it what it is trying to tell you. The second thing, and this is Kierkegaard's invitation, is to take one real risk of being known this week. Not everything, not the full excavation of your inner life in one conversation. Just one thing, one true thing that you would normally keep back. One feeling, one fear, one want, one part of the real version that you have been protecting behind the performance. Offer it to someone who has earned the right to receive it and see what happens. Not because it will definitely work, but because the concealment is costing you more than the risk. The third thing is what Fromm called the practice of love. Genuine attention. The next time you are with someone, really with them, not half present and half somewhere else, try to actually see them. Not the version that is useful to you, not the version that confirms what you already think about them. The actual person. What are they carrying right now that they are not saying? What are they hoping you will notice? What do they need that they do not know how to ask for? That quality of attention, when it is given and when it is received, is the closest thing to the antidote for separateness that any of these philosophers found. The fourth thing, the Buddha's contribution, is to spend time alone with yourself without filling the silence, not meditating if that is not your thing. Just sitting, walking without headphones, eating a meal without a screen, driving in silence, giving the loneliness the space to be present without immediately being treated as a problem to be solved. You will be uncomfortable at first. You might be very uncomfortable, but on the other side of that discomfort is something that most people never find because they never stop running long enough to find it. A quality of presence with yourself that becomes the foundation of every genuine connection you will ever make. I want to end with something personal. The loneliness I described at the beginning of this video, the glass wall, the distance, the feeling of watching my own life from slightly outside of it, it has not disappeared. I do not think it ever fully will. Heidegger was right. It is built into the structure of being a separate self in a world of other separate selves. But my relationship with it has changed completely. I stopped treating it as evidence of failure. I stopped trying to drink it away or scroll it away or talk it away with conversations that stayed safely on the surface. I started sitting with it. I started letting it tell me what it was actually about. I started taking the risks that Kierkegaard was pointing at. The small, terrifying risks of letting the real version be seen by the people who matter. Not perfectly, not all at once, but more than before, more than I thought was safe. And something shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but genuinely. The connections I have now have a different quality than the ones I had before. Not because I found better people, but because I brought more of myself to the people I already had. And they, given the chance to meet the real version, met it, stayed, even chose it. That is what I want for you. Not the elimination of loneliness, not a life so full of connection that the quiet moments never arrive, but the capacity to be genuinely present with yourself and with others in a way that makes the connection real when it happens and makes the solitude bearable, even nourishing when it does. The loneliness you feel in a room full of people is not your sentence. It is your invitation. The question is what you're going to do with it. Here is what I am asking you to do. Today, not eventually, today. Find one person in your life who deserves to know you better, not a stranger, someone who has already shown up for you in some way, and tell them one true thing. One thing from the real version that you have been keeping behind the wall. It does not have to be dramatic. It does not have to be the deepest thing, just one true thing that you would normally keep back. And then notice what happens, not just to the relationship, to the loneliness. Because the loneliness does not live in the crowded room. It lives in the distance between who you are and who you are letting people see. Close that distance, even by one step, even today. Go find it. Go find it.